Welcome back to What's Wrong with This Picture. I'm Dave Dufour here at RVNN TV, and with me again is the, what did we decide? You are the
I don't know, some seasoning, I don't know.
Sultan of Snapshots.
Oh.
The Pharaoh of Photography.
Yeah.
This is Mr. Dennis Guillaume here. We're talking about sensor sizes and sensors in digital cameras. And the whole idea is that if you go to buy a camera, don't get blown away by the old megapixel pitch.
Yeah, megapixels by themselves is not the answer.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't necessarily mean bigger is going to give you better images when it comes to the number of megapixels.
Right.
As we finished up the last segment, we were talking a bit about these different sensor sizes that are available, and I just wanted to clear up a couple of things. First of all, let's suppose that you're looking at a full-frame censored camera versus one of the smaller sensors in another camera.
Right.
Something to remember. Full frame, let's say it's 14 megapixel full frame camera.
Gotcha.
All right. That means that full frame, 35 millimeter sized sensor, is going to have 14 million pixels in it.
Sure.
All right. Now, the fact is that if I go to a smaller sensor that says it's 14 megapixels, and
just as good, right?
And you can get them. Well, different. The fact of the matter is that the 14 megapixels, it means that it's got 14 million pixels, but the sensor is smaller, so what are you supposed to have to do to those pixels? They crushed them into a smaller area.
Yeah, they take a hammer to them, don't they?
14 million pixels in a smaller area means the pixels are smaller.
Gotcha.
All right, so what that all comes down to is that they perform a little differently.
Yes.
And that's the big issue. The fact of the matter is that you can use different lenses on these sensors, but you have to remember that this crop factor we were talking about last time, where it's acting, the lens is acting like a larger millimeter lens, because really what's happening is the portion of the image that would fall on a full frame sensor is now only part of it is being recorded on a smaller sensor.
Okay.
The image stays the same area.
That was what our graphic was showing us earlier.
Yeah, let's look at that again. Here you see that we've got this full frame sensor. Now if we crop down to the APS-C sensor, which is the blue one, what happens is you're getting less of that full frame in the picture because there's less sensor to record it.
Okay.
Now, both of those pictures could very well have 14 million pixels in them, but the pixels in the smaller sensor are going to be smaller pixels.
Gotcha.
The sensor's pixels are smaller.
Well, is that better or worse? I mean, the smaller pixels are worse, right?
For one thing that might be considered better, especially if you're using a less expensive lens, is that the best part of the image in a lens is in the center. Right? As you go out toward the edge, it kind of degrades, and you're less likely to get as good an image in the outer portions of the lens as you are in the middle. So if your smaller sensor is focused on the center, if it's picking up the center of the image being thrown by the lens, you're getting the best part of that lens image, and the worst part of it is being thrown out or cropped out.
Okay, so that actually there is some advantage to that smaller sensor, given the fact that the lens is probably not doing that great a job on the outer edges.
Right. Yeah, and so in that sense, I can get away with maybe a little less expensive lens on my camera because I'm only using the sweet spot, so to speak, in the center of it.
Okay.
This is most helpful, really, when you're looking at the fact that also these smaller censored cameras typically ask for wider angle lenses, because if you want to get that full frame into a smaller sensor, you've got to go wider angle.
Right.
And wider angle lenses are less expensive.
Oh, okay.
On the whole. So your costs go down.
The smaller sensor is less expensive too, isn't it?
That's right. Smaller sensor is less expensive because you can get more sensors out of that silicon disc that they cut the sensor material out of.
Right.
If you've got a full frame sensor, you can get fewer full frame sensors out of that one silicon disc than if you had smaller ones that you're cutting out.
Okay.
So because those discs cost literally $1,000 or more, then the cost of each individual chip that comes out of there or sensor that comes out of there is going to go down as the size goes down.
Okay.
So typically Smaller sensored cameras are less expensive in many cases, not necessarily every case.
So what's the difference in performance in terms of the kinds of pictures you get or the quality of your pictures?
Smaller, again, smaller sensors have smaller pixels. Smaller pixels create more noise than larger pixels because they don't perform as well. You'll notice that in the smaller point-and-shoot cameras that your ISO level, for example, and we've talked about ISO before, ISO level rarely goes above 800 and sometimes to 1600 on some of those point-and-shoot cameras. But that's about it, because if they went beyond that with that little sensor, the noise would create unacceptable images.
And noise being the little kind of just little
grain or
graininess or something like that. It looks like film grain kind of, but not exactly. Okay.
Yeah, and again, we've gone through that in an earlier episode, but the fact of the matter is that you can only go so far with a small sensor before you create unacceptable levels of noise.
I got you. Okay.
Now, when you get into the full frame sensor, you can go higher in ISO because the larger pixels have a greater dynamic range, and they're able to soak up more of the information, and so the noise levels go down because as a result you can use higher ISO levels. So with one of the DSLRs that have larger sensors in them, you end up getting better noise reduction because they're able to absorb the information in lower light.
What about shutter speed in these things? Is the bigger ones faster, right?
Well, no, actually, the bigger sensor takes longer to expose the pixel because it's larger. It's got more information to record. On the other hand, because I can use higher ISO levels, I can run the ISO up and it still be an acceptable quality picture, and therefore I can run my shutter speeds up to where they match or even sometimes exceed that of the smaller sensor.
But you're also saying, but what it sounds like to me too is that the smaller sensor, which if it's faster, then it's not a small camera with a smaller sensor. A little point and shoot might be pretty good for shooting sports and things like that because you can use a higher shutter speed.
A small sensor in a DSLR, oftentimes, when I say small, I'm talking about APS-C sensors and some that are kind of moderately
not cell
small.
phone cameras. Small.
Yeah, but smaller than a full frame.
Right.
Those, because they expose faster, allow the manufacturer to increase the burst rate that the camera can shoot. Burst rate means the number of frames per second that they can shoot. My full frame sensor here in this camera will shoot 3.5 to 4 frames per second, which sounds pretty neat, except that if I had the APS-C sensor by the same manufacturer, they've got a camera out now that shoots just short of 9 frames per second.
Oh, okay.
So what does that mean? Is that if I'm shooting multiple frames and holding the button down and letting it shoot, if I'm shooting, let's say, a sports event, a football game, a basketball game, something like that, I can get 9 frames while tracking motion, action shots.
You're practically shooting a movie almost.
Yeah, almost. But the fact of the matter is that I get high quality images, and I can capture small amounts of motion in a short period of time.
There we go.
That isn't possible with the larger sensors. It takes just too much time to get them to process all the information.
Okay. So what about depth of field? Do we get because you have to use wider angle lenses on the smaller sensors to get the same image? Does that affect the way you shoot pictures?
Well, in general, smaller sensors tend to have deeper depth of field quite naturally. And the larger sensors have a shortened depth of field, which can be an advantage, but it can also be a detriment. For example, let's look at the picture that you got, what was it, Mackinac Island?
Mackinac Island, yeah, this was just last weekend, right.
And in the butterfly house there, here's a picture. Now, this is an example of a picture where the butterfly is in focus, could be in a narrow depth of field because it's turned exactly parallel to your lens.
Right.
And so the only thing that might have gone out of focus would have been the antenna in the back. But in this case, it's very nicely in focus. The thing is, you notice the fence isn't all that out of focus either.
Right, yeah,
It's a little fuzzy, but it's quite a ways back there. So that means that the depth of field here was probably pretty deep. If we go to the next one, here you see, this is a picture of a butterfly that's kind of looking at you at a 3/4 angle. Now you see
He was looking at my wallet.
your wallet.
He wanted my wallet.
Your wallet,
Do you know
yeah.
how much it costs to go into that butterfly house?
No, but I get
Yeah.
he already got your wallet.
He already got my wallet.
The fact is that here, because of the 3/4 angle, there's some of that those wings that are close to the camera and close to the center of the focal area, and then there's some of those wings that move off in the distance. They start to get fuzzy toward the back edge, but they don't really get terribly fuzzy. And in fact, there's that fence again that still isn't out of focus to where you can't understand what it is.
Now I did pay attention to one of your lessons when first of all I shot this with a macro lens
Yeah.
or with the macro setting on my little point and shoot. But I was curious too is that I also made sure that the eyes were in focus.
Eyes are in focus.
The eyes are the window to the soul, even
That's
though in a
right.
butterfly. But anyway, does the macro setting on the camera make a difference in terms of how the depth of field got rendered?
Well, it may to some extent. What it really does is it makes it possible for the camera to focus in closer than if you were further away and came up to that, bumped up to that minimum shooting distance that would allow you the camera to shoot in focus.
Okay.
By using the macro setting, it allows the camera to go a little bit more close to the image.
Okay.
Now we go to the third one, and this one is again a butterfly, kind of at a little bit of an angle. But what we want to notice here is that this, in the case of the foliage in the front and behind that particular butterfly, is still pretty well in focus, and that's quite a distance for a macro shot particularly. And what it means is that it was a smaller sensor that had a deeper depth of field that allowed the foliage to be in focus on either side. Now let's translate that into a full frame sensor, and you would find that you'd have trouble just getting all of the butterfly in focus, because the depth of field is so much narrower with a full frame sensor. And all those other pictures, particularly the one at an angle, some of those wings would have just gone away.
Yeah.
They would have been too fuzzy.
So in this case, you could make the argument that the smaller sensor was actually somewhat of a benefit, although I wasn't able to fuzz out some of the background.
Yeah.
That especially the far away background was still kind of in focus.
Yeah, and the argument that you would get from someone who was in favor or who wanted to fuzz those backgrounds completely out and get them to where they were unrecognizable, like the fence and so on, the argument you would get is with a full frame sensor, because the depth of field is much narrower, I would be able to open up my aperture and get those backgrounds to fuzz very effectively, leaving just the subject in the middle that was in focus. So professional photographers like to do that sort of thing when they're taking portraits of people. There are some advantages that way if you're doing the artsy kind of thing where you want to be able to defocus the area around the subject.
Yeah, so in my case, I'm going to have to go to Photoshop to make that happen, probably. So
Right, and it becomes a bit of a technical challenge just to get it to look natural.
Okay, well, we're going to have some more commentary on sensors for digital cameras when we come back on what's wrong with this picture, so stay with us. Have a question or a comment for Dennis Guillaume? Get in touch at picture@rvnn.tv, and don't forget to send us your RVing pictures for possible use on an upcoming episode. You can also leave a voicemail for Dennis at 877-578-RVNN, extension 704. Follow RV Newsnet on Facebook and Twitter, and you can receive text messages to alert you when we're streaming live by texting RVNN to 72727. That way, you can join us live in the chat room, ask questions, and become part of the RV Newsnet family. Remember, any photos or other material submitted to us become the property of RV Newsnet and cannot be returned. For more TV like this from the world of RVs, head to RVNN.com.